Okay, thank you very much indeed for having me here. I'm very excited to be here. This is my first trip to Israel, and I'm having a wonderful time. So thank you very much for allowing me to come and interact with you all. And I'm looking forward to talking to more of you in the workshop later. So I'm going to be talking today about bridging theory and practice, as you can see. And this is a brief outline of what I'll be talking about. I'll just be starting off with something about teacher agency, looking at using theory in collaborative inquiry with teachers, and giving an example from my work on developing dialogic teaching. A little bit about professional learning materials for teachers that we've developed, and draw some conclusions. So just to say that the Leading Teachers Initiative in Israel, and I have had a look at the little booklet. Well, actually, it's quite a big booklet, a very comprehensive document, which has been brilliant. And that work and my own fits obviously with a sort of increasing focus internationally on teacher professional learning and innovation through collaborative inquiry, working together with each other to investigate, to share, to reflect on practice. This has actually long been a tradition at Cambridge. We've had lots of schools-university partnerships and professional learning partnerships, so this is great. But I think that this proposal that you have actually moves forward, a paradigm shift, if you like, in the professional learning world. It's a system-wide change that looks to me to be coming or already underway, and it's a lot more ambitious than what's gone before. So there's a lot to commend in this particular plan, and I'll just offer some congratulations on that, especially in the foundation of the notion of teachers as agents of change and agents of school improvement. And I think models of educational change actually underplay the role of teachers and misconstrue the role of teacher agency. So one of the prominent perspectives in this area is arguing that actually agency is not an individual capacity. It's an interaction between what the teachers are bringing to the situation and the situation, what it's bringing to the teacher. So the resource is there, what's in the context, and so on. So we need to open up space for agency, clearly, otherwise innovation will be stifled. So a couple of the key elements that I've pulled out of this that I think relate to the work that we've been doing. The recognition of external influence, and that was mentioned earlier as well, it's very valuable. It's linking to the work that we've been doing. It's about not reinventing the wheel and not looking too much inward, but drawing on what's out there as well. The proposal also is highlighting, starting where the teachers are at. So what are their beliefs, what's their knowledge, what's their experience? And that's obviously the most important building block in any kind of professional learning initiative. So this links directly to my own work with teachers and teacher researchers, which I'll be telling you a bit about. So we've been collaborating with teachers to try and develop more interactive practices. And this has, I think, implications for your leading teachers and the people working with them. So my approach is aiming to draw on theory to inform practice. So bridging, and there are multiple gaps between research and practice. Many teachers are not easily able to access research. And the notions of transfer or translation of theory into practice are very simplistic. They don't necessarily work because they're not context specific enough. All of you are working in your own specific context, very diverse contexts, I'm sure, different schools, different kinds of students, different kinds of aims. And any kind of professional learning initiative needs to tailor itself. Okay, so again, we have to adapt to the learner, in this case, the teacher as the learner. And I think, our conclusion here is that a magic bullet about what works, which is a phrase that we use in the UK a lot. Policymakers always want to be told what works, but actually that's kind of meaningless, or at least still elusive. So our approach was through collaboration between researchers and teachers, and here's some of the teachers that we worked with, and trying to create a climate of equitable participation, of mutual respect for each other's complementary forms of expertise, the knowledge that we each bring from our different perspectives, from academia, from the classroom, and have a genuine inquiry where we work together. We draw on video quite a lot. That plays a pivotal role in our studies. And we gain quite a lot of insights through independently looking at video of classroom practice, thinking about what are the critical episodes, what are the interesting insights, what's going on there, and then coming together and sharing those and seeing whether we agree, whether there's how much overlap is there between different people's perspectives, and what can we learn from that through kind of deconstructing practice. These are the teachers that took part in the project that I'll be telling you a little bit about in a moment. So through the review process, the projects were sort of aiming to ask teachers to articulate their professional knowledge in different ways, in new ways, and to look at their own practice, but mainly other teachers' practice, their colleagues and strangers' practice, if you like, teachers they didn't know, and to reflect critically on those practices together with their peers. So the key thing here is that we're looking at practice through a theoretical lens. So what we did together was to develop what we've called intermediate theory, which is bridging between the scholarly theory, what's in the research literature, and what's in the classroom practice, what the teacher's practical theory is, what they're actually doing as well. And looking in detail at how that theory applies in those different settings, pushing its boundaries, seeing how far it holds up, seeing how we need to adapt it to fit the specific context, and different settings, different subject areas, different age groups, and so on. So we were critically interrogating both the teacher's practical theory and actually the scholarly theory. We're not taking it for granted. Just because it's published in an academic journal doesn't mean, it's sort of set in stone. We can look at that, we can try and understand it, we can see actually how useful is that for the actual teacher in the classroom, and where do we need to adapt it. It seems like a theme of adaptation is going through all our three talks, it seems to me just now. So what we tried to produce was sort of enriched understandings of the theory in the form of an analytical scheme, a way of a set of themes, if you like, that could describe classroom practice, that could help us to analyze what we saw when we look at classroom practice. So what kind of thing am I talking about? Here's a very small example from an from an English lesson where teachers, it was a notion where teachers were giving students as much support as they wanted while generating ideas for poems. So they'd been studying some poems in English, and then it came to they have to write their own. So children were sitting there with a sort of blank sheet, and the teacher put up on the board some ideas, some reminders from the previous poems they'd studied, some images, some quotes from the poems, some ideas of how they might start their own. And these things were kind of in the background on the board, on the interactive whiteboard. They could use it or they didn't have to use it. They could choose. It was a sort of optional amount of support that was available. And one of the teachers coined the term silent scaffolding, because it was just there in the background. And so she knew the term scaffolding, but her notion was she was providing a silent form of scaffolding. So it's one way that we kind of manipulated the theory a little bit. So what was the impact on the teachers of working with us to develop this new kind of terminology? They reported that their language had become more precise. Previously, they had a very vague understanding of some of the concepts, but having the vocabulary gave them the ability to describe it more precisely. They also became more aware of what's actually happening in the classroom and how they could, and having some new language to describe it. And being more analytical, as you can see in the second quote. They also reported a sort of a deeper understanding of what these concepts mean. So again, the idea of scaffolding was something that was familiar to them, probably from their teacher training. They'd done bits and pieces of it, but hadn't really understood the notion until we began to look at it in detail under the microscope. So this is a collection of the case studies that we've undertaken rather with teachers. Some of the chapters are co-authored with the teachers, and it charts the change over time as to what they've learned and what they've been doing. And it's about using theory to both understand and to develop classroom practice. Okay, so I'll just give you one of the examples that's reported in that collection, which is of collaborating with teachers to support classroom dialogue. So just in case not all of you are fully familiar with the notion of classroom dialogue and what we mean by this in a productive educational sense of dialogue. It's a bit more than talk. It's not just, you know, having a chat. It's a process of comparing different perspectives, and the notion of difference is really important here. It's about looking at different views on the same thing, comparing them, evaluating them in a respectful way, soliciting everybody's views in an open-minded way, building on other people's ideas. Students talking, giving extended contributions, not just the teacher. Students posing questions, which is quite rare in many classrooms. Bringing together ideas, synthesizing them, coordinating them. So it's an open and critical and constructive process. And the aim of it is, of course, to build knowledge together, to jointly construct something. So an example from one of our projects of this where we looked at the notion of dialogic teaching in the context of technology use, and particularly in the context of an interactive whiteboard. We have these in every single classroom in the UK. It's a bit of an obsession with them. So it's kind of, because it's there, you know, we might as well see what we can do with it. Can we use it much more interactively? They're very expensive. They cost £2,000 each. Vast majority of the time, they're just used to project a PowerPoint or to show a video from the internet or something. Bit of a waste of money, in my view. So we wanted to see whether we could use this technology to support dialogue. And of course, you could use other technologies to do that, but this was the one that's available. And I know you have this in some of your classrooms in Israel as well. Not quite so many, but quite a lot of them. And are they used interactively? Not so often. Not so often. Okay. Okay, so our aim was to develop this. We worked with a small number of teachers from different subject areas and different levels of schooling. We had a primary school teacher, a middle school teacher, and a secondary school teacher in this particular study. And we videoed 3 lessons in each classroom. Then we engaged them in some workshops. In between, we engaged them in some workshops where they discussed some ideas from the research literature, dialogic theory, what does it mean, how does it look like. We showed them some video examples of practice, and they looked at their own videos as well. And we all selected some sort of examples, some critical episodes again. So where did the theory come in? What did we do with the theory? We investigated or grappled with some of the ideas encapsulated under the notion of dialogue, like the term cumulative, which is about building on people's ideas. It's a term that's used by different researchers differently in the literature. So we tried to see, you know, how do we want to use it? And the notion of consensus. There's a bit of a controversy as to whether students should actually be working towards a consensus view when they're doing group work. Should they have some discussion and then come up with a single idea, a single conclusion? So there's a bit of, there's different literature on this. So we debated this back and forth. We looked at the research evidence, and we concluded, like some researchers do, that actually it's the process of working towards the consensus and exploring the different perspectives that's key to learning. It's not the coming up with a single solution at the end. Okay, and then that reconciliation can actually take place over time after they've even left the classroom. So those are the kind of things that we discussed in the workshops. What was the impact on teacher thinking? There's just one extract from one of the teacher diaries after the workshop, which you can see here what the teacher was thinking. They were identifying a focus for their own inquiry as a result of these discussions, and an aim to sort of develop more dialogic approaches, looking at the use of questioning in particular. So the intermediate theory, the outcomes that we put together were framed in a mutually accessible language. So we tried to describe them in ways that teachers could understand and we could understand. In this project with these 3 teachers, one of Diane, who was a deputy principal, took the lead in drafting some materials related to dialogue. So she produced, she turned the research language, the academic language, into much more friendly language, and produced the dialogue table, which had various columns. In the left-hand one, it's in my classroom, we, and these are kind of the aims that she wanted to do. I'll just zoom in on that so you can see a few bits a little bit more easily. So you can see some of the things that she thought were the aims of dialogue, taking risks, being willing to change our minds. So it's about the mindset. In the second column, it's what you will actually see. What are the practices? Asking each other questions, giving feedback in a critical way, and so on. So the idea here was to devise a tool that could be used for professional development for other teachers as well, to share the principles and the conditions of dialogue that teachers could use to create the conditions for dialogue to thrive. So the outcomes included some changes in classroom practice that the teachers reported. Again, a couple of quotes there. Just have a look. So building in the sort of notion of asking children to respond to each other. And then extending what they'd been doing to the school. So it wasn't just in their own classroom, they developed some whole school initiatives. One teacher, Lloyd, developed a way of observing lessons, which was a little bit different to the usual inspection criteria, but actually focusing on how much dialogue is going on and spreading that round. Caroline was an English teacher and wanted to embed that in her departmental plan, her scheme of work for the rest of the year. Okay, so briefly on the professional learning materials for teachers that arose from this, that were co-authored from this. Because obviously teachers could engage in extensive intermediate theory building as well, but that's quite time consuming, so we might be able to shortcut the process a bit by offering teachers some ready-made representations of this kind of principled pedagogy, if you like Diane's dialogue table. So we have a book that we co-authored with the teachers that provide these materials, which can help them to sort of do some more critique and inquiry. So that's a kind of summary of what's in it, various materials, a resource bank of videos and things related to use of technology, but this can also be done without technology. Also including some readings on dialogue, again written in accessible language, and including a case study from each teacher, that they each wrote a chapter about what they'd done. And the whole process is the standard sort of reflective cycle of, reflect and trialing that I'm sure you're familiar with. So what does it look like? Just some prompts, really, this kind of thing. Starting right at the beginning, how do you currently use talk? How important is it? What are the barriers? What do you understand by the term dialogue or dialogic teaching? What benefits might it have? What role could technology play? And each of these has examples, some stimulus resources. How well does my own teaching support dialogue? So they could use that dialogue table that Diane produced as a kind of audit and just check their practice against it. See what they could do. They could look at some videos and then answer questions like this. How do the teachers that you just looked at support dialogue? How effective was that? How useful might these ideas be in your own setting? And then planning some actual lessons. Let's go through that. So exploring all the examples and thinking about how they might try something out from what's been in there. And planning something that's actually suitable for their individual students. And since then, we've carried out an impact project working with 70 teachers who used these actual materials with a couple of workshops with us and tried some things out in between. And the findings show that they did develop much more dialogic practices. Oh yes, the final point about actually building in response to others was something that we asked them to do. So not just, telling the students, I'd like you to be more dialogic, I'd like you to work well with each other, but actually designing the activities so that students were required to build on the previous contribution. Okay, and just returning to the aims of the Leading Teachers Initiative and supporting teachers in sort of systematically developing their professional knowledge base. I just wanted to let you know about a potentially useful resource, which is MESH. Have any of you heard of MESH? No? Okay. So this is an open global network. It has peer-reviewed, accessibly written summaries of the research that researchers have written, some practitioners have written, and it aims to sort of underpin professional judgment and bring research-based evidence to everybody, really. And it's deliberately, again, aimed at supporting teachers as being change agents. It's actually used in, I don't know, over 100 countries, so it's quite extensive. I'll conclude because otherwise I'll be in trouble, right? So, evidence-based practice, this kind of term, I'm sure you have it here as we do in the UK. It's bandied about all the time by policymakers. It's a common phrase, but going a bit further than that, I've just been arguing that theory can actually illuminate practice and move both thinking and practice going forward, if it can be harnessed in appropriate ways for teachers and by teachers. Oh, and that's just to flag up in the workshop later on that I'll be doing. We'll be looking a bit more at the actual conditions for that kind of professional learning. So I'd better finish up, and some contact details if anybody would like any more information, and then just to send you greetings from Cambridge, and welcome you all to come and see us anytime. But I have to say the weather's not as good as it is here. Sorry about that. Thank you.